On September 1st, 1939, 66 infantry divisions, 2,750 tanks, and 1,315 aircraft of the German Wehrmacht thundered across Germany's eastern border into neighboring Poland, plunging Europe into the Second World War. 2 weeks later, on September 17th, the Soviet Red Army followed suit, invading Poland from the east with 33 divisions. The Polish armed forces, brave but outnumbered and outgunned, could do little to resist the savage two-front onslaught. In the wake of the advancing Wehrmacht troops and tanks followed the Einsatzgruppen, or task forces, special SS death squads tasked with rounding up and executing priests, politicians, and other members of the Polish intelligentsia who might resist the occupation, as well as Jews, Romani, and the mentally ill, who Nazi ideology deemed to be Untermenschen, or subhuman. The Polish government capitulated on October the 6th, and by the end of 1939, the occupying Germans and Soviets had murdered nearly 80,000 Poles. Millions more would follow over the next 5 years. Amidst this orgy of murder and destruction, Major Ernst Bloch, an agent of the Abwehr, or German Army Intelligence Service, was dispatched on a seemingly unthinkable mission to locate and rescue Rabbi Josef Schneerson, the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe, or one of the most beloved and influential Jewish thinkers and leaders in modern history. This is the unlikely forgotten story of how the Nazis saved a major Jewish figure from the jaws of their own genocide. The Hasidic Jewish movement of Chabad was founded in 1775 by Rabbi Shneur Zalman in the Russian village of Lyozno, now Lyozno in Belarus. Named after the combination of the words Chokhmah, Binah, and Da'at, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, Chabad was heavily based upon the Kabbalah, or Jewish mysticism, and emphasized such concepts as intellectual inquiry being the gateway to understanding God, and the idea that people are not inherently good or evil, but rather face a continuous inner struggle between these two extremes. In 1796, Rabbi Zalman published the Tanya, the foundational text of Chabad. Today, the movement preaches 10 basic mitzvahs or commandments: Afas Yisrael, or the love of one's fellow Jew; Chinuch, or Torah education; Torah study; the donning of tefillin, leather boxes containing Jewish texts wrapped around the left arm and head during weekday morning services; the affixing of a mezuzah, or scriptural scroll, on the doorpost of a house; observing tzedakah, or the giving of alms every weekday; the possession of Jewish holy books; the lighting of Shabbat and festive candles; the following of kashrut, or Jewish dietary laws; and the following of Taras, or Hamash Pokor, or the Torah perspective on married life. In 1813, Rebbe Zalman's successor, Dov Bershanori, moved the seat of the movement to the village of Lubavitchi in Smolensk Oblast, where he established a long-lived dynasty of Rebbes. In 1915, the 5th Rebbe, Shalom Dovber, left Lubavitchi and relocated the movement, now commonly known as Chabad Lubavitch, to the Russian city of Rostov-on-Don. Rabbi Dovber's only son, Yosef Yishtak Schneerson, was born in Lubavitchi on June 21, 1880. From an early age, Yosef was groomed to become the next Lubavitcher Rebbe, being appointed his father's personal secretary at age 15 and attending numerous rabbinical conferences in Kovno and Vilna, today Kaunas and Vilnius in Lithuania, to discuss various issues affecting Jews across the Russian Empire. In 1897, he married Nechama Schneerson, great-great-granddaughter of Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the Cheshmach Tzedek, or Third Rebbe, in 1898, and was appointed executive director of the Teshuvah Tomjeh Tamimim Talmudic Seminary, founded by his father the previous year. Throughout his long career, Schneerson proved himself a brilliant religious scholar, a skilled civic organizer, and a staunch advocate for the rights and welfare of Russian Jews, who were often persecuted by the Tsarist and later Bolshevik governments. In 1901, he worked with various business leaders across the Russian Empire to establish textile factories in the cities of Dubrovna and Mahilyo, which ultimately employed some 2,000 Jewish employees, while during the 1904 to 1905 Russo-Japanese War, he arranged the shipment of kosher food to Jewish conscripts serving in the Russian army. Meanwhile, he petitioned government officials and backers in various European countries to use their influence to end pogroms or anti-Semitic riots in Russia. For these activities, he was arrested 4 times by the Tsarist government, but released every time due to a lack of evidence. Schneerson's activism only increased following the Russian Revolution of 1917, when the Jewish community found itself in opposition to the official Bolshevik policy of state atheism. This policy, which sought the eradication of all religion across the Soviet Union and the world, was overseen by a special branch of the Communist Party known as the Yevsektia. Throughout the 1920s, Schneerson established of underground yeshivot, or traditional religious schools across Russia, in order to preserve Jewish culture. Then, upon the death of his father on March 21, 1920, he assumed the title of 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe. In 1924, the Cheka, the Bolshevik secret police, forced Schneerson to leave Rostov-on-Don and relocate to Leningrad, today St. Petersburg. There he continued his underground activities, dispatching Chabad representatives and founding seminaries across the Soviet Union to strengthen Jewish communities. But on March the 21st, 1927, as Schneerson was observing the Yasit, or anniversary of his father's death, 3 Cheka agents burst into his synagogue to arrest him. According to legend, Schneerson responded to the armed men by saying, "This little toy, your gun, has made many a man change his mind. That little toy can intimidate only the kind of man who has many God's passions. And but one world, this world. Because I have only one God and 2 worlds. I am not impressed by your little toy." Schneerson was imprisoned in Leningrad's infamous Shpolerna prison, and following a show trial was convicted of counter-revolutionary activities and sentenced to death. Thankfully, following protests from Western governments and the International Red Cross, his sentence was commuted to 3 years exile in the city of Kostroma and then banishment to Riga in Latvia. There he established another Talmudic seminary and organized the state-controlled factory production of matzah, or unleavened bread, for the celebration of Passover. Today, Rebbe Schneerson's release from Soviet prison is celebrated annually by the Chabad Lubavitch community. In 1929, Schneerson visited the Holy Land, then in the British Mandate of Palestine, before traveling to the United States, arriving in New York City on September the 17th aboard the ocean liner SS France. Some 600 followers gathered at the docks to meet the Lubavitcher Rebbe, while 100 New York City police officers were assigned as his security detail. During his 8th-month visit, Schneerson traveled to Philadelphia, Baltimore, Detroit, Boston, Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Louis, and Washington, D.C., where he met with President Herbert Hoover, among several world leaders who had petitioned for his release. Schneerson's goal was to spread awareness of the plight of Russian Jewry, who, due to Soviet policy, were easily censored and forbidden from leaving the country. Due to the dangerous political climate, Schneerson's American followers urged him to remain in the United States, but he refused. The newspaper The Jewish Record reporting that, quote, "A movement has begun among Chabad Hasidim to have the Lubavitcher Rebbe remain in America. A committee was organized under the name of Agudas Hasidei Chabad, in which are represented all of the Chabad shuls of Chicago. The committee will develop plans that will enable the fulfillment of this wish for the Rebbe to stay in America. The committee, under the leadership of Rabbi Chaim Tzvivi Rubinstein, presented their wish to the Rebbe. While the Rebbe hasn't given a positive response, he stated clearly that he cannot even begin to consider their plan unless it would be understood that his coming to America would also mean the establishment of Yeshiva Tomchei Temamin in whichever community he would choose to reside." At the time, the establishment of a traditional yeshiva in the United States was not a popular one, with American Jews viewing such establishments as outdated holdovers from the old country, incompatible with progressive American values. As a result, Schneerson dismissed the United States as too irreligious and returned to Riga, where he remained until 1934, when again he relocated to Otwock, a suburb of Warsaw. Then, in September 1939, the Nazis invaded Poland, and this is where our story finally begins. Initially, Schneerson refused to leave Otwock, remaining to tend to his community as best he could. But once it became clear that the Polish army could no longer hold out, Mordecai Dubin, a Chabad follower and member of the Latvian parliament, arranged for Schneerson and his family to settle in Riga. However, to reach the Latvian capital, the Rebbe would have to reach Warsaw and catch a train north. A perilous 60-kilometer journey along a road frequently bombed and strafed by Luftwaffe aircraft. Nonetheless, the now 59-year-old Rebbe, overweight and suffering from multiple sclerosis, left Ostwalk along with his family and a group of devoted followers, only to find the Warsaw train station destroyed. Thus, they were forced to seek refuge among Chabad followers in the Warsaw ghetto, while day after day, German aircraft systematically flattened the city's Jewish neighborhoods. It seemed only a matter of time before Schneerson and his family were either killed or arrested. But across the Atlantic, an unlikely rescue was being organized. Though at the time the Chabad movement in America was small, a small group of followers led by Brooklyn rabbi Israel Jacobson managed to hire Washington lobbyist Max Rode to petition for the Rebbe's relocation to the United States. Rode contacted dozens of politicians, including Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis, Sol Bloom, the head of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the House of Representatives, and New York Senator Robert Wagner, who, on September the 22nd, sent a telegram to U.S. Secretary of State Cordell Hull informing him that, quote, "Prominent New York citizens concerned about whereabouts of Rabbi Yosef Yitzhak Schneerson, present location unknown." 4 days later, Mordecai Dubin in Riga telegrammed Rabbi Jacobson, describing his failed rescue attempt and urging him to, quote, "Save lives, rabbi and family, try every way, every hour more dangerous, answer daily what accomplished." Rhodes' lobbying campaign quickly picked up steam, with Philip Rosen, head of the American Jewish Joint Committee's European office, writing to the U.S. representative in Riga, quote, "Greatly interested, world-famous Rabbi Schneerson, now Moranovska 32, Warsaw. Urge your doing utmost utmost to effect his protection and removal to Riga. And on September the 29th, New York attorney Arthur Rabinowitz wrote Justice Brandeis requesting, quote, "Any aid you can render, possibly through Ben Cohen, feel justified in troubling you by extreme danger to Schneerson's life and his great moral worth to world Jewry." Benjamin Cohen was a member of President Franklin D. Roosevelt's so-called Brain Trust and the author of several major pieces of New Deal legislation. As a former counsel for the American Zionist Council, Cohen was a staunch defender of the welfare of Jews around the world. Yet despite mounting pressure from within his administration, President Roosevelt, then running for a third term, was reluctant to intervene in the rapidly escalating European war. At the time, isolationist and anti-Semitic sentiment in the United States was at an all-time high, stoked by such figures as legendary aviator Charles Lindbergh and Catholic preacher and broadcaster Father Charles Coughlin. But Max Rode persisted, and by doggedly badgering figures such as Brandeis, Cohen, and Secretary of the Treasury Henry Morgenthau Jr., he finally succeeded in convincing the Roosevelt administration to intervene on Rabbi Schneerson's behalf, if only to throw the American Jewish community a bone and keep them quiet. Luckily, while the American government had little interest in helping European Jewry, the government of the Third Reich had a keen interest in maintaining good diplomatic relations with the US and keeping them out of the war. Benjamin Cohen thus contacted diplomat Robert Pell, whom he knew to be friends with German diplomat Helmut Wohlthat, head of Germany's 4-year economic plan. As Cohen suspected, Pell confirmed that Wohlthat was willing to cooperate, seeing the rescue of Rebbe Schneerson as a small price to pay for continued good relations. Pell conveyed this message to Secretary of State Hull, who telegrammed Wohlthat at the US consul in Berlin to approve the extradition of the Rebbe from occupied Poland. There was just one problem. Poland was under military and not civilian administration. Wohlthat thus appealed to Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, head of the Abwehr, or German Army Intelligence Service. Secretly opposed to Nazi ideology, throughout the war Canaris committed numerous acts of internal sabotage and resistance against the regime, including passing vital intelligence to the Allies, helping 500 Jews escape the Netherlands in 1941, engineering the continued neutrality of Francoist Spain, and participating in the unsuccessful plot to assassinate Adolf Hitler on July the 20th, 1944. Canaris was eventually arrested on July 23rd, 1944, convicted of treason, and executed by hanging at Flossenburg concentration camp on April the 9th, 1945. To rescue the Rebbe, Canaris selected Major Ernst Bloch, a highly decorated Abwehr operative. A veteran of the First World War, in the interwar period, Bloch served in a commercial branch of the military intelligence that spied on visiting businessmen. He was also half Jewish on his father's side, what in pseudoscientific Nazi racial hierarchy was known as a Mischling, or half-breed. Despite their precarious position within Nazi society, more than 60,000 half-Jews, aka Mischling First Grade, and 90,000 quarter Jews, Mischling Second Grade, served in the armed forces of the Third Reich. These included high-ranking officials such as Field Marshal Erhard Milch, head of the Reich Air Ministry, or RLM, and amusingly, certain individuals used by the Reich Propaganda Ministry as examples of ideal Aryans. However, many important Mischling, like Milch or Bloch, were granted official German blood certificates, confirming them to be true Aryans, or they simply had their Jewish heritage conveniently ignored. According to Brian Mark Rigg, author of the 2006 book Rescued from the Reich, How One of Hitler's Soldiers Saved Lubavitcher Rebbe, Admiral Canaris laid out Bloch's improbable mission in stark terms. Quote, "You're going to go to Warsaw, and you're going to find the most ultra-Jewish rabbi in the world, Rabbi Yosef Yitzhak Schneerson, and you're going to rescue him. You can't miss him, he looks just like Moses." Despite his background, Bloch was a fully assimilated Christian and had little affinity towards the Jewish community. Yet he followed his orders dutifully and dispassionately. Along with 2 assistants, Unterfeldwebel, or Sergeant Klaus Schenk, and Gerfreiter, or Private Johannes Hamburger, he travelled... I know it's German, but really. Johannes Hamburger? Sorry. He travelled to Warsaw and began searching the city's enormous Jewish ghetto for Rebbe Schneerson. According to Brian Rigg, it proved a difficult task. Quote, "He would go up to ultra-Orthodox Hasidic Jews wearing a Nazi uniform with swastikas and say, 'I'm looking for the Rebbe.' And they'd say to him, 'Yes, and we want to shave off our beards and join the German army.' Then they would walk away." In late October, Bloch was provided with the Rebbe's last known address, Bonne Fraterska 29, only to discover that the building had been destroyed. This information was passed to Max Rode back in New York City, who on November the 14th sent a telegram to the International Red Cross in Geneva informing them that, quote, "German military officer detailed to locate Rabbi Joseph Isaac Schneerson not apprised officer's mission. Hope you can devise method of communicating information to Schneerson, detailing of German officer done at request of Schneerson's friends. Urgent, take advantage opportunity." The Red Cross duly dispatched a messenger to Warsaw with a telegram guaranteeing safe passage to Riga for Schneerson and his family, and instructing the Rebbe to immediately turn himself into the Gestapo. The messenger eventually succeeded in locating Schneerson, who had been hiding out in the Warsaw ghetto under miserable conditions and was in failing health. Reluctantly, Schneerson contacted Major Bloch, who soon arrived at the Rebbe's hideout. As Schneerson's grandson, Shemaraho Garari, later recalled, "It was so overwhelming. As soon as we got to the door, they rushed right in. There was primarily one guy, and he used every dialect of German that you could think of. During the time the soldiers were there, my grandfather was calm and composed on the outside. He was a sick man, and it got to him after a while. He was a very strong personality, but not strong physically. He was exhausted." But Schneerson was far from safe. The Schutzstaffel, or SS, the paramilitary wing of the Nazi Party, intensely distrusted Admiral Canaris and the Abwehr and sought out any excuse to discredit and dismantle the organization. Bloch thus faced the daunting task of smuggling Rebbe Schneerson and his entourage out of Warsaw under the noses of the Sicherheitsdienst, or SD, the SS security service run by the notorious Reinhard Heydrich. This was made especially difficult by the fact that Schneerson and his entourage refused to shave their beards or remove their traditional clothing. Bloch thus decided to take his 19 charges to Berlin to throw the SD off the scent, passing them off as political prisoners. As Shemaraho Gari remembered, "We had to go through various military checkpoints with one person who was our escort. We marveled at the way of his handling things. On the train, if a conductor came over, Bloch would handle the conversation. The difficulty was making sure nobody kicked us out of the compartment we were in. I remember one episode when an angry German officer came up to us and said, 'Why are these Jews sitting in the compartment when the officers are in the corridor?' Bloch had to do quite a bit of explaining, and he did." In Berlin, Schneerson and his entourage were taken to the city's Jewish community center, where they met the Latvian ambassador to Germany and received their Latvian visas. The next day, Bloch escorted the group to the Latvian border, which they crossed without incident. On December the 17th, Mordecai Rubin wrote to Rabbi Jacobson in New York that Rabbi and family arrived well Riga. But while the Rebbe and his followers expected swift passage to the United States, they soon ran into political resistance. Breckinridge Long, head of the visa section of the State Department, was a rabid anti-Semite and refused to grant the group immigration visas. Once again, however, the American Chabad community intervened, with Max Rode invoking a 1921 exception to the quota for European immigrants, allowing passage to religious ministers with active congregations in the country. In January 1940, Long reluctantly issued the visas, and Rebbe Schneerson left Riga along with his mother Sarah, his wife Hannah, his son Berka, his grandson Shemariahu, and his followers Chaim Hodakov and Nissan Mindel and their families. They left just in time. In October 1939, under the terms of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Non-Aggression Pact between Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin, the Soviet Union forced Latvia to accept the stationing of 30,000 Red Army troops in their territory, who swiftly deposed and murdered many government officials and installed a puppet government headed by August Kirchensteins. In August 1940, the country was absorbed into the Soviet Union as the Latvian Soviet Socialist Republic, while in June 1941 it was invaded by Nazi Germany as part of Operation Barbarossa. From Riga, Rebbe Schneerson and his entourage travelled by plane to neutral Sweden, landing in Stockholm before sailing to Gothenburg, where they boarded the ocean liner SS Drottningholm. Finally, on March 19, 1940, 6 months after the German invasion of Poland, Josef Yitzhak Schneerson, the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe, arrived in New York City to great fanfare. The following year, the Rebbe succeeded in extracting his son-in-law, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, from Marseille in Vichy, France, before the borders were closed down. In 1944, Major Ernst Bloch was ousted from the Abwehr on suspicion of involvement in the July 20th assassination plot. He joined the Volkssturm, or National Militia, and was killed in the spring of 1945 while defending Berlin against the Soviet Red Army. Due to his role in saving Rebbe Schneerson and other Jews during the war, in 2010, Israeli Rabbi Baruch Kaminsky and Harvard scholar Dan Auerbach petitioned the Yad Vashem World Holocaust Remembrance Center in Jerusalem for Admiral Wilhelm Canaris to be recognized as one of the righteous among the nations, Gentiles like Oskar Schindler and Raoul Wallenberg, who helped protect Jews from Nazi persecution. However, they were unsuccessful. Meanwhile, Rebbe Schneerson settled in the Crown Heights neighborhood of New York City, and despite his failing health and the skepticism of his followers, worked tirelessly to build up the Chabad movement and Orthodox Judaism in North America. He founded the first Lubavitcher yeshiva, or seminary, in New York City, and established numerous printing houses to publish and distribute his own voluminous writings and those of his predecessors. In 1948, he established a Lubavitcher village called Kfar Chabad near Tel Aviv in the newly created state of Israel, while the following year he became a US citizen. On account of his failing health, Schneerson arranged for a federal judge to officiate the ceremony at his home rather than traveling to a courthouse. However, Schneerson's health soon caught up with him, and he died on January 28, 1950, at the age of 69. He was buried at Montefiore Cemetery in Queens, with his gravesite known as the Ohel becoming a popular site of prayer and reflection for Chabad followers and other Jews. His son-in-law and successor, Lubavitcher Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson, would go on to become a renowned religious scholar and leader in his own right, helping to greatly expand the Chabad Lubavitch movement around the world. He was even considered by many Chabad adherents to be the Jewish Messiah. Menachem Schneerson died in 1994 at the age of 92, leaving no named successor, leading the Chabad community to declare him the last Lubavitcher Rebbe. As a result, his predecessor, Yosef Schneerson, is often referred to as the Friediker, or previous Rebbe, sometimes as Rayatz, a contraction of Yosef Yitzhak. Today, Chabad Lubavitch is among the largest Hasidic movements in the world, boasting nearly 100,000 adherents worldwide and performing humanitarian and religious outreach work in dozens of countries. The survival and thriving of the movement and its dynasty of spiritual leaders owes much to the miraculous rescue of Rebbe Yosef Schneerson from the jaws of the Third Reich, an unlikely mission which remains one of the most obscure and surprising chapters of the Second World War and illustrates the often baffling contradictions that lie at the intersection of faith and international diplomacy.